Well, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here in an event which is all about startups. And many of you might be wondering why a person from sort of the legacy world, is here in the startup world, and what do legacy people have to learn from startups? And what do startups maybe also sometimes have to learn from the legacy world of what has really, kind of worked, or some of the experiences that the legacy world could also provide to the startup world. So pleasure to be here, and I will talk about a few things about brand building. What's really the value about brand building? What can we learn from brand building? What can we really sort of gain from brand building? Because while many startups have got very good ideas, very good products, very good ecosystems, very good technologies, very good connected dots, but you still need a brand, and I will tell you why we need to include the thinking of a brand. Maybe the brand kicks in at a certain point in time in the journey of a startup, but still very important to kick in with the thinking of the brand. And the third thing that I will talk about is go-to-market. Go-to-market is not about setting up a sales team and getting some things to go there. It's a lot about, how do you really bring your idea to market? How do you really capture attention of people? How do you really fulfill, and how do you really go forward? So like I said, India is not one opportunity. It's a vibrant opportunity. It's a growth market. So there's a lot of opportunity in front of us that we have, which we could capture. And of course, India is at a cusp of acceleration. You look at the Indian ambition is so very strong. You look at access today with digital, it is there. You look at aspiration, it is very much seen. Very often, I've worked with Nestle, I've worked with Unilever, Hindustan Unilever earlier. India is a very price-sensitive market, yes, but it's also a very aspirational market. If people understand what value would something bring in, people are ready to go, and people are ready to buy into those propositions, to embrace those kind of products, to embrace those kind of brands forward. So at the cusp of acceleration, ambition, and the entire area of access, today we are in a good place to basically unleash a huge set of opportunities in front of us. Growth is what essentially startups are looking at. You have a good idea, you have a good starting point. You may be at different stages on the curve, maybe at an early stage, maybe at a growth stage, maybe at a scale-up stage. But growth is essentially a combination of three things. It's about looking at the first element, which is brand. The second element, growth to go to market, and the third element, execution. And it's not about these three things separately. It's about these three things integrated together to create a compounding effect on one another, and that really can translate into growth in a very, very big way if you are able to get these three elements right. Is it brand first? Is it GTM first? Is it execution first? You can still think. You can still debate that I want to get to a certain stage, I want to get to a certain level, and then my brand starts coming in and does the heavy lifting. Maybe still possible, but you need to start thinking about who's your target customer, target consumer, your brand and all its elements, and of course, the entire element of GTM and execution. So keep all the three in mind when you're trying to tap into the opportunity that India throws in front of you. I talked about this, what could 100-year-old companies, in my previous working at Hindustan Unilever and at Nestle, these are all 100-year plus companies. They've survived time for 100 years. And maybe they have, another 100 years to go in front of them if they keep doing things and if they keep getting things right. Of course, there will be a lot of changes. The last 100 have been embraced with a lot of change. The next 100 would have even more change, even more dynamic change, even more change coming from all different corners, which you may or may not have even thought about. Think about AI. 5 years ago, while AI has been there for 20, 30, 40 years, in academic institutions, in laboratories, in different places, and so on and so forth, in R&D and so on and so forth, the way it has come to life over the last 2, 3 years, 4 years, and the way it is coming to life now, and the kind of change it's making, there are, of course, things to learn also from what the new era is bringing to us. So it's always a good combination of some fundamental principles which still probably hold true. And then there is the dynamic change which we always need to embrace at all points in time. Of course, very important for us to keep in mind on what stage is a startup in. Are you at a sort of an early stage? Are you thinking of building something? Are you thinking of sort of, going and seeing what is really out there? Are you trying to feel the waters? Are you getting a lot of, feedback from different people, from not just family, friends, but real customers, real other people, and so on, from the entire ecosystem? Not just talking to the end customers, but also get to the next level. You have to think in stages. Brands also think in the life cycle of brands. If you look at a brand like Surf, for example, many, many years ago, or maybe a brand like Colgate, many, many years ago, people did not even know why to brush their teeth with a paste. They were sort of, at a very early penetration stage of brands. Today, we all, understand oral care and everything else, but at that stage, people did not know that. So they were at a penetration stage, at a very early stage of trying to understand, why oral hygiene is important, what do you need to do, why do you need to use a toothpaste, why do you need to brush, etc., etc. And there's still parts of India which still have low penetration of some of these product categories to today, where people are looking at very advanced things. People are looking at how do you take dental hygiene to the next level, how do you really have different products and solutions for your entire oral care regimes, how do you look at different problems which you may have with oral, and so on and so forth. So there's always this entire mindset of looking at an early stage, looking at a sort of a growth stage, and looking at a sort of a scale stage. Segmentation is very critical. India is not one market. And I was talking to some of the wonderful startup booths outside and some of the organizations that are there. It's never one market. You need to really identify who is this target consumer, who is this person who you're going behind. And that clarity has to be very, very key. Sometimes startups say and come up and say that, I have 1.4 billion population today in front of me. I want to talk to everyone. No, you have to be very, very segmented. You have to delight that particular segment of consumers and meet his or her needs and wants in the most effective manner before you go to the next. Then only would you have traction. Would you have discovery? Would you have acquisition? Would you have retention? Would you have traction, which will give you that propelling business model that goes there? So this is a very important step, and it's a very clear strategic step which all of us, which all of you and everyone around us has to really go behind to identify who is that, core target. And there would be other consumers who would also feel like them and who would get activated and who would come and sort of, feel like being like them. But the core and the central target is going to be very important of who are you really targeting. And this is a very fundamental principle of how, if you look at any successful startups, and you can name them, you can look at them, there's so many of them, there in front of us and around us, they would have identified this core target, whether you call it a persona, whether you call it an ideal customer profile, or there are different kinds of, language and jargon around it. But the fundamental thing is that how do you go and address this particular, target customer segment and in the best possible manner? Very important to keep this in mind and not just understand that customer from a superficial standpoint. The principle that, we talk about is know your customer deeply. If you don't really know your customer deeply, mothers know their children deeply. That is why, they are so meaningful to their children. Families know each other very deeply. The moment they don't know each other deeply, that is the moment when, things can fall apart. Yeah, so knowing deeply is a source, is an important pivot of great strength. And therefore, knowing your customer deeply and on his or her entire end-to-end process, on his or her, entire flow and where you come in, what problem do you solve, what value do you add in life, what do you really help that customer to do is very important. And it's often, understanding their intent, their lifestyle, their workflow, their work patterns, their problems, their issues, their aspirations, their concerns, and other aspects which are better understanding of their, behavior, of their ways of thinking and working than just very superficial things. If you say that, okay, I'm talking to accountants, Now, accountants is more like a job description of what that person is trying to do. But if you understand that accountant much better in terms of what that accountant is trying to do, what are the problems he or she is facing, what can you become, more efficient in, what can you become more effective in, how can you help that accountant to work, what are the accountant's behaviors, what's his lifestyle or his work style, and where exactly can you plug in, you will have a better understanding of the problem to solve. And that is a very fundamental aspect of understanding, what solutions you provide and to whom or for whom you provide that solution. The next element is around a brand. Brand is a pricing power. Brand is a set of emotion. Brand is a set of values. It has functional aspects. It has emotional aspects to it. And a brand enables you to get to do something without even thinking about it. If you were to go and let's say you're calling a particular, cab service, you would have one or two brands which would automatically come to your mind. You don't even have to think about it. Yeah, that this is your, one or two or whichever one you would go to. When you buy many consumer products, people go into stores and they're on autopilot. They're not even thinking, should I be doing this or this or this or this? The brands are just present in their people's minds as a network of different memories, network of different values, network of experiences, networks of product, functional aspects, emotional aspects, and this is what really builds it. And a brand then, if you have powerful brands will then enable that entire process to be on far more autopilot because the brand is a mental shortcut. And finally, it's all about, how do you really tap into the consumer's mind or the customer's mind. Brand is your moat. Products can be easily copied. Why you use one particular detergent versus another, there would be very little difference in many of them in a particular price segment. At a more premium segment to a more, let's say, mass segment, of course, the formulations would be different, the products may be different, and so on. But if you look at 2 or 3 products in their only segments, the functional difference between 1 or 2 of those products may be not as high. But the way people think about those brands, the way the brands are present in people's minds, the way, brands are recalled, the way brand values identity is created is all something which is very unique and which then stays present. And the moment you lose that uniqueness, you lose that loyalty, you lose that retention power, you lose that pricing power, and so on and so forth. And this is what indeed is happening in some of the categories. And in some of the startups which have got it right, they have been able to get their brand right at an early stage, at a growth stage, and even at a scale-up stage. And then the brand gets the firepower for you to really keep going from one stage to another. Of course, it's very, very important that you start anything starting from what's the problem you want to solve. What is that issue that you want to solve, and a good understanding of that problem, a strong customer proposition which is geared to a particular problem that you want to solve is your good starting point of anything you want to start. So if you have the right problem to solve and you have the right proposition which is unique, which is differentiated, and with the brand which adds that layer on top, you in its totality would start getting a feeling that I have something unique which I can offer, I have something credible that I can offer, I have something solid that I can offer which people may be interested in. The second, element that you need to think about after getting your customer and the pain point and everything right is to also look at meaning. Meaning is what differentiates between one brand and another, between one proposition and another, and often meaning is linked to category. Any meaning, any category that you think about, any product category that you think about has got a certain meaning. If you look at just coffee or tea, many of us would have had a cup of coffee or tea outside, before coming into this room. A category like tea or coffee has meaning. And that meaning is very important to understand what's the meaning in that customer or consumer's life. Because then you can see what value you can add to meaning. Meaning can shape markets. Meaning can shape behaviors. Meaning can shape various other things. And therefore, meaning is something that is another very important deep dive element to have a good focus on, because understanding meaning will give you that deeper penetrative behavioral understanding and the context and mindset understanding which can help you propel forward, which can help you build something differentiated, which can help build something, which is further there. Of course, with the meaning, are also the demand episodes in people's lives about that meaning. For example, when do people consume a cup of tea or coffee? What do they really do? What does it really mean? Is it for stimulation? Is it for pleasure? Is it for health? Is it for something else? And then, really try and understand what is the demand economics of that entire meaning. You could extrapolate it to any category, from a safety pin right up to some aircraft or something like that. In all the spheres of different categories that we interact with in our lives, there is meaning which has to be really deciphered and understood, because that will give you a source of competitive advantage. And on the other extreme is this entire extreme of risk. Highly loaded risk in all aspects. I don't have even one element of trust. Yeah, and there are all the different shades in between. And different consumers, customers will be at different stages of all this, of this entire matrix, from trust on one side to absolute, risk on the other side. You have to understand what is there in between. How is it getting broken, or how is it getting built? What is breaking it? What is building it? And don't make it too complicated. The good thing that I really like about the startup world is that there is less jargon, there is less complication, and there is more focus about what really matters. And that is what the crux of it is. What is breaking trust? What is building trust? If you have that good understanding of these two elements at every stage for your different customers or for your different segments that you're going behind, you would be able to get a whole set of what are your pain points, what are your validations, what outcomes do I need to provide, what do I need to bring, what will be the right route to getting there, what will be the story, journey, etc. And then you can build all these elements if you have a good understanding, a pinpointed understanding of what are the elements you need to work on. And that really gives you a very important source of competitive advantage. Trust is built in micro and macro moments. It is built through, these invisible moments. And it is built all the time. And it's very important for us to believe in that. I was just having a talk with somebody outside the room, and that person was talking about Vicks, Vicks as a brand. Now, Vicks as a brand, just promises what? It is a good decongestant. If a child has certain fever or a little bit of cold or whatever, mothers usually apply it on the child. Maybe it's often on a rainy day or late at night or something. And, the mother is looking for signals that after applying Vicks, is the child feeling better? Is the nose a little bit cleared? Is the child waking up the next day morning a little better? Is the fever gone down? Is the temperature on the forehead a little lower? These are all moments of trust for that particular category, for that particular brand. These are all simple, small moments of trust in a category, in a product category which many of us have used. And you could extend this to any category, simple or complicated, whether it's in the consumer brands world or in the fintech world or in the SaaS world or in some other world, somewhere, some element of human trust is getting built or getting broken. And these are often happening in those invisible moments. If the mother has applied a particular product and the child is not feeling better, then that's a signal that maybe, there is something that is not working, or maybe there is some different product that is required at that level of congestion or that level of fever or whatever else. So therefore, you have a good understanding of how the entire system is working. Very important to have this in mind. And then when you're bringing all of this together, you're building your proposition, you've got a brand layer to it, you're building trust elements, you're trying to make something meaningful, you have to get attention. Getting attention is the most difficult thing in today's world. There is so much of noise, there are so many alternatives, and there is so much of crowd around us that it is very difficult to get attention. If you're on your mobile phones, you're just scrolling like that. You need something thumb-stopping to stop you to see and get attention. People's attention spans, there are various studies being done in different academic universities and all that, the attention of a human being is now getting to the attention of a goldfish, in some seconds and milliseconds and whatnot. Yeah, so they don't have attention. There are 20 things flying. The number of pieces of content that as human beings we are seeing today runs into thousands and thousands. When you're coming here from your home, you would have seen, some things on your phone, some different pieces of content, news, ads, reels, stories, everything else. There are hoardings around you. There's outdoor, there are buses, there are taxis going with different messages, different content. There are emails coming to you, etc. So there are all kinds of content, and therefore getting attention is very key. You have to have that in mind. How do I secure attention? And today, attention has to be secured in a very short period of time. And that's a very important element of how do you build for attention. So think about building for attention in the shortest period of time so that you can grab that person and then you can engage. Then you can sit down and engage. You can have a full meal with that person, to understand everything and to provide whatever is of meaningful value to them. But getting attention is very, very key. Once you have that and you have created a certain amount of attention, then you go to market. Go to market is not about, you hire a sales team and you hire some BD guys and they go out and keep meeting. You have to understand who your customers are. Goes back again to the fundamentals. Who the customers are, why they care, how to reach them, why would they convert, how would they convert, and also why not in each of those elements, and why they stay. Because finally, for any business to work, it's not just acquisition. You have to have retention. The successful businesses have retention more than acquisition. Acquisition is important, but retention for the longevity of business has to be also important. And therefore, your go-to-market has to address this whole cycle. You have something meaningful, you're grabbing attention, now you need to fulfill it in the best possible way, putting it in front of people who would think that, yes, this is meaningful, I want to try it, or I want to see what it is about. The two concepts, which are there. One is about mental availability and the other one is about physical availability. Today, digital availability is also, let us say, close enough to physical availability. It's available online rather than in actual shops or in actual places. It's available through digital interfaces, which is important, but mental availability is also important. And therefore, you need to care about both these elements of mental availability and physical availability and define the right pathways to get to the right mental availability and get to the right physical availability. Understand what are your barriers and what are your triggers on this path to be able to really get there. Distribution. Distribution is a real moat. It's a moat on which big companies have been built. It could be online distribution, it could be offline distribution, it could be any kind of distribution, but it is a real moat. And think about all channels which are important. Think about where the customer is deciding, where the customer is accessible, distribute it. And if you want to go one level further, go to those moments where the customer is the most receptive. Then that would bring about that change in the most meaningful manner because you are there where the customer is most receptive to that message, most receptive to that product or service. And therefore, channels, integrations, partnerships, and there are so many other, kind of ways in which the entire distribution arena is getting redefined in front of us. There's so many creators, influencers, the whole ecosystem, and with so many different opportunities over here. So think through all the different opportunities that you could leverage, but make a choice. You cannot do 20 things well. You can do one or two things well. And so therefore choose those one or two things first, which you can really do well, and then get to the next two things that you can really do well, which is again linked to the trajectory of your organization, to the trajectory of the business that you're building, and not just everything for everything. You have to make choice, and choice is a very important element of what you do and what you say that, okay, maybe I will do later, or what you will say that I will not do at all. There are various people who say that digital is a strategy. Digital today, of course, is a very big force multiplier. It's a big enabler. It can be very close to everything that goes into a strategy, but strategy is often one level higher of what do you really wish to do. Yeah, it is your strategic direction and your overall strategy. Digital may be 100% linked into it. You might be doing a digital-only strategy, but digital as strategy alone may have a few missing elements. So therefore think of the bigger picture and therefore integrate digital in the best possible way when you're defining your strategy. Nowadays, our shelf has gone far beyond what we may have been used to as a shelf earlier. Today it's not just about search and search engine optimization and those kind of things. It is that your brand or your product needs to come up when AI is looking at it. If you are not in conversations, you are not being searched. If you are not in search, you are being missed. If you are not visible on the shelves, you are being missed. So therefore, you have to be present. Presence is very, very key, and this is what some of the more successful brands get to over a period of time, by being present, not just optimizing for things like clicks and so on, but optimizing for presence, optimizing for brand, optimizing for memory, but being present, and especially the entire element of search and being present is very, very important. There's a lot of talk often in the performance world, in the startup world, when they say, oh, I'm doing perf, I'm doing performance marketing. I think I would just like to remind everyone that there are two things. Brands, build or create demand. There has to be demand for something. Even if, what you're building is not yet a full brand, but that has to have a certain power to get demand. And then performance will capture that demand. But if you don't have that demand, you may not be able to capture the demand. And if you're only capturing the demand, but you're not building or creating the demand, you might have something which may not fully work out over a period of time. So therefore, important to look at brand, and brand being able to capture demand, performance, a brand being able to build demand and create demand, and performance being able to kind of, capture demand, because brand will give you that slope. Once you have a brand coming in, it will give you that slope of going steady. Performance will go up and down, depending on what you want to put. And if you're just doing performance, you will run out of money at a certain stage. So therefore, it's important, of all the 100-year-old companies that I was talking about, many of them, all of them, have actually built brands over a period of time. And wherever they have failed, in some product categories, they may have failed, or they may be in a challenger position, they are always being questioned. And therefore, very important for us to build the brand over a period of time. You cannot discount your way to building a business. You cannot performance market your way to building a business. You can do it for a period of time, but then over a longer period of time, you will have to get in back to your moat, to your competitive advantage, to the brand that you are building over a period of time. There's often a lot of talk that, there's so much AI around us. What can AI do? Of course, AI can do a lot. Embrace AI fully. I think very important for us to understand the value of AI. The way agentic AI is coming in, and the way the agents are getting deployed in different parts, and the value that they can bring in is great. But you always need human strategic foresight, human understanding, and human judgment on top of it. It can never be AI alone. It's always AI together with human judgment and human in the loop, or what we call about. But of course, AI can be used to shape an idea, can be used to expand its horizons, can even pinpoint so much of data. With so much of data around us, it's impossible for the human mind to digest so much of data and make meaning out of it. And AI, with all the right elements, can of course, grab it, capture it, get to a certain point. Of course, there has to be human interpretation on top, human understanding and judgment on top, but embrace AI in its fullness, because that is something that can really help you in a very, very important and interesting way, in a very exciting way, in a very efficient way, to help you in delivering what you're trying to deliver. And therefore, just using AI in the world of searches, previously probably with search, you need to be just, try and be with the right search words and keywords and everything else, try and be on the top. But today, the world view is a little different. In the world of AI and LLMs, brands being discovered and found is not enough. Brand must be seen, trusted, and chosen within the LLM ecosystem, because the AI has to then, advise that this is the brand that you may possibly, go and look at, or something which is a suggestion or a search output. And therefore, brands have to be present, and brands have to be present in that conversation among all different AI platforms, so that the brand is recognized and the brand comes up in front of whoever the target is. Before you scale, now we have, of course, moved as we develop the proposition to the scale part of it. And before you scale, ensure that you have trust locked in. If people do not trust you still, then you will scale, but then you will start falling off. And we have seen so many examples of startups around us who went up their way there, but somewhere, some of the elements in the chain were not completely right. And that is where there is an opportunity to get your trust elements there, that yes, when people come to me, they would trust me, and trust will build in the scale. And there are different ways of, getting trust. Of course, the experience is very, very key, but also leverage and see, how you could get reviews, UGC, the right experiences and so on, so that you're able to really get, trust at a reasonably good level, at a strong level actually, before you start scaling to the next level. Because otherwise, if you don't have that, then you will be just renting out your model. You will try and look at acquiring people, but you will not be the chosen one. You will have dependence on different other elements. And our objective should be, how do you reduce dependence? And how do you have something which can stand on its own feet? And which is standing on his or her own feet, so that, people come in, people feel that they get something meaningful out of it, it's trusted, it meets and fulfills everything, and they're leaving delighted to again come back as a retained person, to be an advocate of the entire whatever you're offering, and actually bring that alive over a period of time. Otherwise, you are just thinking very short term, you're just thinking about, certain parts of it, and you're not really building a long-term business. If you look at many successful startups that we see around us, normally there are 4 or 5 elements, little more applicable in the consumer brand space, but also could be very applicable if you just sort of, reinterpret it in the world of, fintech startups or SaaS startups or other kinds of, different startups in different industries. Very strong consumer centricity, very strong customer or consumer centricity, very strong, bold, culturally connected communication. You look at, startups in the food delivery space, the kind of cultural connect that they have with people, the kind of communication that they bring out, the kind of, cultural moments that they talk about is all very, very interesting spaces. They're bold, they're communicative, they're culturally very, very relevant, and people can resonate with that culture. Even in the case of, if you look at the great success of UPI and everything around it, was again very, very strong, culturally connected communication. Very trustworthy elements of it built in. And those organizations which sort of built in that entire curve out there with all the elements were the ones who were successful and actually led the consumer. Relentless product innovation. We have seen that the change today in the world will never be as slow as what it is today. Change later on will be faster than what it is today, and it's already very fast from where it was earlier. Digital fluency, very, very key to understand and master all the elements of the ecosystem so that you understand and are able to leverage the full power of digital. Because we talked about, access. Today, access is there very much with digital. If you build in the right elements, you can get to that person in the most strong way. Very distinctive sales strategy. And finally, a lot of velocity and agility, because the world is changing and the world is moving very, very fast. Lots of things to learn from startups. And, in legacy organizations that I've been, we have always, I've always thought about, how to look at what can we learn from startups. And there are lots of great learnings, that we always used to think about and still think about. What do we really need to embrace? How do we create demand? How do we really connect well? How do we really, have that connect with culture, social dynamics, and everything else? And if you look at the great startups which have emerged in different parts of the country, from the tier 2, the tier 3 cities, and the problems that they're solving, and the kind of connect that they have with the social dynamics out there, with actual real world problems that they're trying to solve, is very, very inspiring for everyone to learn from. Startups, of course, have a great edge, and we should never lose that edge, the edge of speed, the edge of experimentation, the edge of storytelling, the edge of actually bringing in different content at different points in time, and finally, the edge of being digitally native, because that's where you think, and that's where is your element or is your root of thinking. So finally, who would be the future winners, in this entire ever-evolving world? Probably there are 3 elements that would define, them. First of all, and in no particular order, these are elements which are kind of, at the same level. It's more like a triangle. One, of course, people who think brands. Because brand will give you that long-term moat. Brand will give you that long-term leverage. Brand will give you that long-term velocity and trust and everything else, the values and identity and the pricing power, which will be necessary for a business would be a growth mindset. How do I get growth? What should I think about growth? And how do I really ensure that I don't have any leaks in my entire growth journey? How am I really able to go growth step by step, in a right way, in a very solid way? And finally, thinking about from an end-to-end mindset, from a completely kind of system thinker mindset of looking at the entire end-to-end. Because if you look at most of the problems in the world today, they're all interconnected problems. It's not that there is one problem in isolation. This is the problem because there is another one, and it can link back to another root cause or this root cause. So the more you can think holistically, the more you can really capture the opportunity that India presents. Lovely to be present here and talk to all of you. Thank you so much for your attention.
It was rightly said, it is not AI alone. It is with human mind and effort along with AI. This session was surely a masterclass of building brand. Thank you, sir. A massive round of applause for Mr. Chandan Mukherji.